The emperor who built a dynasty. Brothers of blood, the tragic fall of Caracalla and Geta. December, 211 AD. The torches burned low inside the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill. Outside, Rome slept beneath a cold winter sky, unaware that history was about to change forever. Marble corridors echoed with hurried footsteps as soldiers moved through the palace, their armor clinking softly in the darkness. Servants pressed themselves against the walls, lowering their eyes. No one dared ask questions. Something terrible was happening. In one of the private chambers sat Julia Domna, the most powerful woman in the Roman Empire. She had spent years standing beside emperors, commanding respect from senators, generals, and philosophers alike. She had witnessed civil wars, betrayals, assassinations, and victories. Yet nothing could prepare her for the nightmare about to unfold. The doors burst open. A young emperor stumbled into the room. His white toga was already stained crimson. His breathing came in desperate gasps. "Mother!" It was Geta. Behind him rushed armed centurions with naked swords. Geta threw himself into his mother's embrace, clinging to her robes as though she alone could shield him from death. Julia screamed for them to stop. The soldiers hesitated only for a heartbeat. Their orders had come directly from Rome's other emperor, Caracalla. Geta cried out for mercy. Ancient writers describe his final moments as a desperate appeal to his mother while the attackers closed in. Moments later, the blade struck. Blood splashed across Julia Domna's clothes as her younger son died in her arms. The emperor's body collapsed onto the marble floor, while the palace fell into a silence heavier than any battle. Ancient accounts differ in detail, but they agree on the brutality of the murder and on the fact that it took place in their mother's presence. Standing only a few steps away was the man who had ordered it. His own brother. The Roman Empire had survived Hannibal. It had survived Spartacus. It had survived Nero. It had survived civil wars that claimed tens of thousands of lives. But now, the greatest empire on earth had been brought to its knees by something far older than politics. Hatred between brothers. To understand why one emperor murdered the other inside the imperial palace, we must travel back almost 20 years, to a time when Rome itself stood on the edge of collapse. Rome after Commodus. The death of Emperor Marcus Aurelius in AD 180 marked the end of what many historians call the Pax Romana's Golden Age. His reign had been defined by discipline, duty, and philosophical reflection. His son, Commodus, inherited an empire unlike any the world had ever seen, yet he lacked his father's restraint. Over time, Commodus became increasingly isolated. He surrounded himself with flatterers, indulged extravagant spectacles, and embraced the image of a gladiator emperor. His public appearances in the arena fascinated some Romans and horrified others. Senators saw his behavior as beneath the dignity of the imperial office, while the Praetorian Guard and court officials became entangled in plots and shifting loyalties. On the last day of AD 192, Commodus was assassinated. His death did not restore stability. Instead, it unleashed chaos. Rome suddenly found itself without a universally accepted ruler. The Senate hurried to proclaim an elderly and respected official, Pertinax, as emperor. He had earned a reputation for honesty and military competence, and many hoped he would restore discipline after Commodus' excesses. But reform came at a price. Pertinax attempted to reduce corruption and reassert control over the Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers responsible for protecting the emperor. Many guardsmen had grown accustomed to lavish rewards and political influence. They viewed the new emperor's discipline as a threat to their privileges. His reign lasted only 87 days. The Praetorian Guard stormed the palace and killed him. The empire was descending into uncharted territory. The empire for sale. What happened next stunned even the Romans. After murdering the emperor they had sworn to protect, members of the Praetorian Guard effectively auctioned the throne. The highest bidder would become ruler of the Roman world. That bidder was Didius Julianus, a wealthy senator who promised enormous payments to the guards in exchange for their support. News spread through Rome with astonishing speed. The empire had not been conquered. It had not fallen to invaders. It had simply been sold. Citizens watched in disbelief as Julianus entered the palace wearing imperial purple. Senators accepted him out of necessity rather than conviction. Across the provinces, however, powerful generals refused to recognize his authority. 3 men, each commanding experienced armies, prepared to fight for the throne. One stood in Syria, one in Britain, and one along the Danube frontier. His name was Lucius Septimius Severus. He would change Roman history forever. A soldier from Africa. Septimius Severus was not born into one of Rome's oldest aristocratic families. He entered the world in Leptis Magna, a prosperous city on the North African coast, in what is now Libya. The city was a thriving center of trade, linking Africa, Italy, and the eastern Mediterranean. Merchants, scholars, and officials passed through its harbors, carrying goods and ideas from across the empire. Although his family possessed wealth and local influence, Severus understood that lasting power in Rome depended on more than noble birth. It required military success. His career advanced steadily through the imperial administration. He served in various provinces, gaining experience as both governor and commander. Those who met him often described a disciplined, intelligent man who valued preparation over spectacle. Unlike many politicians in Rome, Severus spent years among the legions. He learned what soldiers respected. He learned what they feared. Most importantly, he earned their loyalty. When news arrived that Pertinax had been murdered and the throne auctioned to Didius Julianus, Severus understood that the empire faced not merely a political dispute but a crisis of legitimacy. His troops proclaimed him emperor. He accepted. Without delay, he marched toward Rome. The March on Rome. The advance of Severus' army was swift and carefully planned. Cities along the route opened their gates rather than resist. Many local officials judged that supporting the Danubian commander offered the best chance of restoring stability. Meanwhile, Didius Julianus remained in Rome, increasingly isolated. His promises to the Praetorian Guard could not compensate for the absence of widespread support. The Senate watched events unfold with growing anxiety. As Severus approached the capital, resistance collapsed. The Senate abandoned Julianus. He was condemned to death. After ruling for only a few weeks, he was executed. When Severus entered Rome, he did so not as a conqueror devastating his own capital, but as a commander presenting himself as the empire's restorer. His first major decision sent a clear message. He dismissed the existing Praetorian Guard, the very force that had murdered Pertinax and auctioned the throne. Many were stripped of their positions and banished from the city. In their place, Severus recruited new guards drawn largely from the loyal Danubian legions. Rome had a new emperor. But his greatest challenges still lay ahead. A throne won by the sword. Although Severus controlled Rome, 2 powerful rivals remained. Pescennius Niger had been proclaimed emperor in the eastern provinces. Clodius Albinus commanded strong forces in Britain and the western territories. Civil war became inevitable. Severus first turned east. The campaign against Niger was hard fought. Several major battles determined the future of the empire before Severus ultimately emerged victorious. The eastern provinces returned to his authority, strengthening both his military reputation and his political legitimacy. Only one rival remained. For a time, Severus attempted compromise with Albinus, granting him the prestigious title of Caesar. Yet mutual suspicion steadily eroded the relationship. Eventually, both men prepared for war. Their armies met near Lugdunum, modern Lyon, in AD 197. It was one of the largest battles fought between Roman armies. The fighting was brutal. Veteran legions clashed against fellow Romans in a struggle that lasted for hours. Victory finally belonged to Severus. Albinus was defeated. With no rivals left standing, Septimius Severus became the undisputed ruler of the Roman Empire. He had won the throne through determination, military skill, and the unwavering loyalty of his soldiers. Now he faced a different challenge. He needed a dynasty. A future. He needed sons. A new imperial family. Years earlier, Septimius Severus had married Julia Domna, a woman from Emesa in Syria. She was renowned not only for her beauty but also for her education and intellectual curiosity. Philosophers, physicians, jurists, and scholars gathered around her court. She became one of the most influential empresses in Roman history, participating actively in imperial life and accompanying Severus on many campaigns. Together they had two sons. The elder was Lucius Septimius Bassianus. History would remember him by another name. Caracalla. The younger was Publius Septimius Geta. From the outside, they appeared to be the perfect imperial family. A victorious emperor. A brilliant empress. Two healthy princes. Rome believed the future was secure. No one could yet see the invisible seeds already taking root inside the imperial household. The seeds of rivalry. Of ambition. And of hatred. Those seeds would one day grow into a tragedy that would stain the marble halls of the imperial palace with a brother's blood. Two princes, one future. Brothers of blood, the tragic fall of Caracalla and Geta. The empire had finally found stability. After years of civil war, Septimius Severus had achieved what few men in Roman history ever accomplished. He had defeated every rival, secured the loyalty of the legions, and established a new imperial dynasty. Across the Roman world, monuments celebrated peace once again. Merchants crossed the Mediterranean without fear of pirates. Roads stretched from Britain to the deserts of Arabia. Grain ships sailed safely from Egypt to feed more than 1 million people living in the capital. To ordinary Romans, the future seemed bright. The emperor had two sons. Surely one day they would inherit the greatest empire on earth together. But history has a cruel habit of hiding its darkest chapters behind moments of optimism. Long before swords were drawn inside the imperial palace, the battle between Caracalla and Geta had already begun. Born into power. Lucius Septimius Bassianus was born on April 4, AD 188, in Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon, then one of the most important cities in Roman Gaul. At the time, his father was still climbing the imperial hierarchy. No one could have predicted that this child would one day rule the Roman Empire. Bassianus received a new name several years later when Septimius Severus sought to strengthen his political legitimacy. The emperor claimed symbolic descent from the Antonine dynasty and renamed his eldest son Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, linking him to the memory of Rome's most respected rulers. History, however, remembers him by a different name. Caracalla. The nickname came from a long Gallic hooded cloak, the caracallus, that the emperor frequently wore. The garment became so associated with him that later generations forgot his official name almost entirely. His younger brother, Publius Septimius Geta, was born in AD 189. Barely a year separated the two boys. From the very beginning, they shared almost everything. The same tutors. The same palace. The same parents. The same expectations. Yet they could not have been more different. A palace unlike any other. Growing up inside the imperial palace was unlike any childhood in the Roman world. The Palatine Hill overlooked the Forum, where the daily life of Rome unfolded beneath marble temples and towering monuments. From the palace windows, the princes could see triumphal processions celebrating military victories, religious festivals honoring the gods, and senators gathering to debate matters of state. But the palace itself was a world apart. Every servant bowed as the boys passed. Every guard stood at attention. Every conversation became quieter when members of the imperial family entered the room. The children of the emperor did not simply belong to a family. They belonged to an institution. Their lives were governed by protocol from an early age. Even their games carried political meaning. Every friendship could become an alliance. Every rivalry might one day influence the fate of the empire. Julia Domna's influence. If Septimius Severus represented discipline and military authority, Julia Domna embodied intellect. She believed an emperor needed more than courage on the battlefield. He needed wisdom. She surrounded herself with philosophers, physicians, jurists, poets, and scholars from across the Greek-speaking world. Their discussions ranged from ethics and law to astronomy and literature. The imperial princes often grew up hearing debates that few Romans outside the elite would ever witness. Julia hoped both boys would become educated rulers. They studied Homer, Virgil, Livy, Greek philosophy, Roman law, public speaking, history, military strategy. The education of a future emperor demanded excellence in every field. Yet while both brothers learned the same lessons, they absorbed them differently. Two very different personalities. Ancient historians, especially Cassius Dio and Herodian, portray Caracalla as energetic, impulsive, and fiercely ambitious. These authors often wrote critically about him, so modern historians approach their descriptions with caution. Even so, they broadly agree that he possessed an intense personality and an unusually strong attachment to military life. He admired soldiers more than senators. He enjoyed physical training. He preferred military camps to luxurious banquets. He wanted to be feared. Geta, by contrast, appears in the sources as calmer and more reserved. While ancient writers sometimes idealized him after his death, he seems to have shown greater interest in administration and court life than his older brother. He smiled more easily. He spoke more carefully. He was often described as approachable. One brother sought admiration through strength. The other through diplomacy. To Septimius Severus, these differences were manageable. To Rome, they would one day become catastrophic. Lessons from the legions. Unlike many earlier emperors, Septimius Severus rarely left his family behind while campaigning. His sons accompanied him on military expeditions from a young age. They watched engineers construct bridges across rivers. They saw blacksmiths repairing weapons deep into the night. They observed disciplined formations of thousands of legionaries moving as though they were a single living organism. The emperor believed future rulers should understand hardship. Cold mornings. Long marches. Military discipline. The realities of war. For Caracalla, these experiences were exhilarating. He admired the soldiers' endurance. He watched officers command with absolute authority. He dreamed of leading armies himself. The legions noticed. Many veterans appreciated the prince's enthusiasm. Years later, these same soldiers would become one of the greatest sources of his political strength. Geta also learned military customs, but he never appeared as captivated by army life as his brother. His interests lay elsewhere. And Caracalla noticed the first signs of rivalry. No one knows exactly when the brothers first began to dislike one another. Ancient sources offer no single moment when affection turned into hostility. Instead, the resentment seems to have grown gradually. A competition during lessons. Disagreements during public ceremonies. Arguments over precedence. Small insults. Minor victories. Children often quarrel. Imperial heirs could not afford to. Every disagreement attracted attention. Servants whispered. Tutors reported incidents. Officers observed which prince impressed the soldiers. Members of the court quietly began comparing them. Which son resembled the emperor more? Which one spoke better? Which one inspired greater confidence? Without intending to, everyone around them fed the rivalry. An emperor's concern. Septimius Severus was not blind. He recognized that his sons lacked genuine affection for each other. At first, He believed maturity would solve the problem. Brothers competed. That was natural. Time, responsibility, and shared duty would surely unite them. He encouraged them to appear together during official ceremonies. He involved both in public events. He praised each son before the Senate. Whenever possible, he emphasized equality. Yet equality created another problem. Neither brother wished to stand beside the other. Each wanted to stand ahead. Princes before the Roman people. As the years passed, Caracalla and Geta increasingly appeared before the public. Crowds lined the streets whenever the imperial family traveled through Rome. The princes distributed gifts, attended religious festivals, participated in ceremonial games, visited military camps. Their images appeared on coins circulated across the empire. To millions of Romans who would never see the imperial palace, the brothers represented continuity, hope, the future. Artists carved statues showing harmony between them. Official speeches praised their unity. The empire celebrated an image that existed only in marble and bronze. Behind palace walls, reality was very different. The weight of expectations. Imagine growing up knowing that every word you spoke might one day influence an empire stretching across 3 continents. Every mistake became public. Every achievement invited comparison. Neither brother could escape his father's shadow. Septimius Severus had won an empire through sheer determination. How could either son hope to equal such a legacy? Caracalla responded by pushing himself harder. He wanted to prove he was every bit the soldier his father had been. Geta chose another path. He tried to demonstrate that wisdom and moderation could also command respect. Instead of complementing each other, they drifted further apart. Each success for one felt like a defeat for the other. A family dinner. Ancient historians do not record every conversation within the imperial household. Yet they consistently describe an atmosphere growing colder with each passing year. One can imagine an evening meal inside the palace. The emperor discussing affairs of state. Julia Domna attempting to keep the conversation light. Servants silently replacing dishes. Caracalla speaking with confidence about military matters. Geta responding with a different opinion. The emperor correcting one son, then praising the other. A brief silence. A glance across the table. A smile that never reached the eyes. These moments, repeated over years, may have mattered far more than anyone realized. Hatred rarely appears overnight. It grows quietly. Fed by pride. By jealousy. By comparison. Until one day, it becomes impossible to contain. An empire watching. By the early years of the 3rd century, both princes had become familiar figures throughout the Roman Empire. Provincial governors studied them carefully. Generals wondered which would eventually command the armies. Senators debated their strengths in private. Merchants hoped the coming transition of power would be peaceful. No one wanted another civil war. Rome had already endured enough bloodshed. Septimius Severus seemed determined to ensure a smooth succession. He believed that by sharing responsibility between his sons, he could preserve both family unity and imperial stability. History would prove him tragically mistaken. For beneath the ceremonies, beneath the smiles, beneath the carefully staged appearances, 2 future emperors had already begun competing for something that could never truly be shared. Absolute power. And in Rome, absolute power almost always demanded an absolute victor. Growing hatred. Brothers of blood, the tragic fall of Caracalla and Geta. There is an old Roman saying. Nothing is more dangerous than ambition without restraint. Few families would prove that truth more completely than the house of Severus. As Caracalla and Geta entered adulthood, the rivalry that had once seemed like ordinary sibling competition began to transform into something darker. It was no longer about pride. It was no longer about childhood jealousy. It became a struggle for identity. For influence. For survival. Inside the imperial palace, almost everyone sensed the change. The smiles became forced. The conversations shorter. The distance between the brothers grew wider with every passing year. Neither of them yet knew how the story would end. But both had already begun preparing for a future in which only one could rule. The court begins to divide. Power in Rome never belonged solely to the emperor. Around every ruler existed an invisible network of senators, generals, lawyers, financial officials, freedmen, provincial governors, military officers, and palace servants. Every decision they made could strengthen, or weaken, the throne. As the princes matured, these influential figures naturally began asking themselves an uncomfortable question. Who will succeed Septimius Severus? Officially, the answer was simple. Both sons. The emperor repeatedly emphasized that they would rule together. Unofficially, few believed such an arrangement could last forever. Some officials admired Caracalla's confidence and military instincts. They believed the empire needed a warrior. Others preferred Geta's calmer temperament. They hoped for stability through careful administration rather than intimidation. Nobody openly declared loyalty. Not yet. But private conversations changed. Dinner invitations became political. Friendships became strategic. Even a compliment directed toward one prince could be interpreted as an insult to the other. The palace was becoming two separate worlds under one roof. Two brothers, two visions of Rome. Caracalla increasingly spent his time with officers and soldiers. He admired discipline, strength, endurance. He often wore military clothing even when formal court dress would have been expected. The famous Gallic cloak, the Caracallas, became part of his public image. It was practical. Simple. Soldiers appreciated that. They saw an imperial prince who looked more like one of their commanders than a distant aristocrat. Geta preferred a different environment. He spent more time among administrators, legal scholars, and members of the imperial bureaucracy. He understood the importance of efficient government. Taxation. Provincial administration. The machinery that allowed an empire stretching thousands of kilometers to function every single day. Neither approach was inherently wrong. Rome needed soldiers. Rome also needed administrators. The tragedy was that the brothers no longer believed there was room for both. A father's impossible task. Septimius Severus had spent his life defeating enemies. He knew how to break sieges. How to organize supply lines. How to command armies across deserts and mountains. Yet the greatest challenge of his reign waited inside his own home. No military strategy could force two brothers to love one another. Ancient sources suggest the emperor frequently attempted to present them as equals. Both received honors. Both appeared beside him in ceremonies. Both were granted important titles while still young. Caracalla was named Caesar at an early age and later elevated to Augustus, making him co-emperor during his father's lifetime. Geta followed a similar path, though somewhat later. On paper, everything seemed balanced. In reality, the difference in timing mattered. Caracalla had been recognized first. And first often felt like favorite. Whether Septimius Severus intended it or not, the younger brother may have viewed himself as permanently standing in someone else's shadow. At the same time, Caracalla may have feared that his father intended to give Geta equal authority despite their differences. Each brother saw injustice. Each believed the other received more. Public unity, private conflict. The Roman people rarely witnessed open hostility. Imperial ceremonies demanded perfect choreography. When the brothers appeared before crowds, they smiled. Raised their hands together. Offered sacrifices to the gods. Received cheers from thousands of citizens. Artists carved reliefs showing harmony. Coins depicted the imperial family as united. Official propaganda presented stability. But behind closed doors, ancient historians describe arguments becoming increasingly frequent. Meals ended early. Meetings became tense. Servants learned to avoid placing the brothers in the same room unless absolutely necessary. Some palace officials reportedly chose carefully which corridors to use depending on which prince was nearby. The atmosphere had changed. People were no longer witnessing family disagreements. They were navigating political danger. Julia Domna's burden. More than anyone else, Julia Domna understood what was happening. She loved both sons. She also understood power. Unlike many Roman empresses before her, Julia played an active role in imperial government. She corresponded with officials, traveled with the emperor on campaigns, and cultivated one of the most sophisticated intellectual circles in the empire. She had helped build the Severan dynasty. Now she feared watching it collapse. Ancient writers portray her as a tireless mediator. She encouraged compromise, organized shared appearances, attempted private conversations, urged each brother to think beyond personal pride. Sometimes they listened. More often, they did not. No mother wants to choose between her children. Julia refused to do so. History would eventually force that impossible choice upon her anyway. Life under constant observation. Growing up as an imperial prince meant there was almost no privacy. Every servant observed. Every guard reported. Every tutor evaluated. Letters could be copied. Conversations repeated. Rumors spread with astonishing speed. Imagine trying to trust anyone under such circumstances. Could a servant carrying wine also be carrying information? Could a childhood friend secretly support your brother? Could a senator praising you today abandon you tomorrow? The palace became a place where suspicion flourished. And suspicion has a remarkable ability to create the very enemies it fears. The army watches closely. The Roman army paid careful attention to the imperial succession. After all, emperors relied heavily on military support. Soldiers noticed Caracalla's enthusiasm for army life. He trained with them, shared hardships during campaigns, spoke their language. This strengthened his reputation among many officers. Geta maintained cordial relations with the military but inspired less obvious enthusiasm in the surviving sources. That difference mattered. Septimius Severus himself had risen to power because the legions believed in him. Everyone understood that an emperor without soldiers rarely remained emperor for long. Caracalla understood this lesson perhaps better than anyone. The dangerous logic of absolute power. Modern readers sometimes ask a simple question. Why couldn't the brothers simply divide authority? From today's perspective, compromise seems obvious. But Rome's political culture made such arrangements extraordinarily difficult. The emperor was not merely a king. He was commander of the armies, supreme judge, chief religious figure, source of law, center of political authority. Power flowed outward from one individual. Shared rule had existed before. Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus had governed together. Other emperors had also divided responsibilities. Yet those partnerships depended on mutual respect. Caracalla and Geta possessed none. Every decision risked becoming an argument. Every disagreement threatened to paralyze government. Each brother increasingly viewed the other not as a partner, but as an obstacle. The emperor begins to worry. By the final years of the 2nd century, Septimius Severus could no longer ignore reality. He had built a dynasty through decades of war. Would it disappear in a single generation? The emperor reportedly spoke often about unity. He reminded his sons that Rome's enemies watched for weakness. Barbarian tribes pressed along the northern frontiers. Parthia remained a formidable rival in the east. The empire needed stability. His sons nodded, made promises, then returned to competing almost immediately. Even the greatest emperor in the world could not command affection. A family portrait. Imagine a sculptor commissioned to carve the imperial family. The emperor seated confidently at the center. Julia Domna beside him. Caracalla standing proudly to one side. Geta mirroring him on the other. To future generations, the sculpture would symbolize strength, continuity, unity. Yet beneath the polished marble, the truth was far more fragile. One brother believed destiny favored him. The other believed justice demanded equality. Neither could imagine surrendering. History often celebrates great battles between nations. But some of its bloodiest wars begin much closer to home. Across a dinner table. Inside a family. Within the walls of a palace. And soon, Septimius Severus would take his sons to the edge of the known world. He hoped war against Rome's enemies might finally unite them. Instead, it would only bring them closer to the war they were destined to fight against each other. The Emperor's last campaign. Brothers of blood, the tragic fall of Caracalla and Geta. The Roman Empire had reached farther than any civilization before it. Its roads crossed mountains and deserts. Its laws governed millions. Its legions guarded borders stretching thousands of kilometers. Yet beyond Rome's northern frontier lay a land that refused to submit. A place of endless forests, frozen marshes, violent storms, and fierce tribal warriors. The Romans called it Caledonia. Today, we know it as Scotland. It was here, at the very edge of the known world, that the Severan family would make its final journey together. The campaign would become Septimius Severus' last. It would also reveal, more clearly than ever before, that his sons were no longer merely rivals. They were becoming enemies. A frontier that defied Rome. Britain had been under Roman control for more than a century. The prosperous southern regions contained thriving towns, baths, temples, and marketplaces that looked remarkably similar to those in Gaul or Italy. But farther north, Rome's authority faded. Beyond Hadrian's Wall lived numerous tribal groups collectively referred to by Roman writers as the Caledonians, though they were not a single unified nation. These peoples knew the rugged landscape intimately and fought in ways that frustrated conventional Roman tactics. The forests swallowed entire marching columns. Marshes slowed heavily armored legionaries. Mountain passes became deadly ambush sites. Victory here was never simple. Earlier emperors had accepted a practical solution. Hold the frontier. Fortify the wall. Do not waste lives trying to conquer every valley. Septimius Severus thought differently. He wanted more than defense. He wanted a decisive victory. Why Britain? By the early 3rd century, the emperor was approaching 65 years of age. He had already spent decades campaigning across the empire. His reputation was secure. So why undertake one final expedition to one of the harshest provinces Rome possessed? Several reasons likely influenced his decision. The northern tribes had launched repeated raids beyond the frontier. The emperor also wished to demonstrate that age had not weakened him. Perhaps most importantly, he wanted his sons to gain real military experience before inheriting the empire. No classroom could teach command. Only war could do that. So, in AD 208, the imperial family sailed for Britain. For Caracalla and Geta, it was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Arrival at the edge of the empire. The journey north transformed everything. The warm Mediterranean climate disappeared. Instead came cold winds carrying rain from the Atlantic. Heavy clouds covered the sky for days. Roads dissolved into mud. Roman forts became isolated islands of civilization surrounded by wilderness. York, known to the Romans as Eboracum, served as the emperor's headquarters. From here, Severus planned one of the largest military operations Britain had ever seen. 3 legions. Thousands of auxiliary troops. Engineers. Surveyors. Supply wagons stretching for kilometers. The emperor intended to march deep into Caledonia. Not merely to punish raiders. To break resistance once and for all. The prince who loved the army. For Caracalla, Britain felt like home. Not because of the weather. Far from it. But because he could finally spend nearly every day among soldiers. He rode with officers. Inspected camps. Observed military drills. Questioned experienced centurions about tactics and logistics. Unlike many princes who preferred the comfort of the palace, Caracalla seemed genuinely fascinated by army life. He admired discipline above all else. A legion functioned because every man understood his place. Orders were obeyed immediately. Weakness endangered everyone. Perhaps he wished the imperial family operated the same way. No arguments. No compromise. One commander. One decision. One unquestioned authority. The army gave him a vision of the world that would later shape his rule. Geta's different role. Geta also accompanied the campaign, but his responsibilities differed. While Caracalla immersed himself in military affairs, Geta often handled administrative matters behind the front lines. Managing supplies. Reviewing reports. Helping oversee communication between headquarters and provincial officials. These tasks rarely attracted glory. Yet armies depended upon them. Food. Weapons. Pay. Medical supplies. Without careful organization, even Rome's greatest legions could not survive. The brothers contributed in different ways. Their father likely hoped this division of labor would show that each possessed valuable strengths. Instead, it reinforced the belief that they belonged in different worlds. Fighting the Caledonians. The campaign itself proved exhausting. Unlike Rome's traditional enemies, the Caledonian tribes rarely offered open battle. They preferred mobility. Small attacks. Ambushes. Sudden disappearances into forests and hills. Roman historians describe soldiers cutting roads through dense woodland, building bridges across rivers, and carrying supplies through landscapes where wagons often became useless. Every kilometer required enormous effort. Disease spread easily. Cold rain soaked clothing day after day. Pack animals died. Even experienced legionaries struggled. Some ancient sources claim the Romans suffered extremely heavy losses during the expedition, although the exact numbers remain uncertain and are likely exaggerated. Victory came not through one decisive battle but through relentless pressure. Villages were destroyed. Food stores seized. The Caledonians withdrew deeper into difficult terrain. Rome advanced. But at tremendous cost. An aging emperor. Throughout the campaign, Septimius Severus' health steadily declined. Ancient writers mention that he suffered from chronic illness, possibly aggravated by age and the harsh British climate. The emperor increasingly relied on litters to travel. Sometimes he could no longer ride horseback. Pain accompanied almost every movement. Yet he refused to abandon the campaign. His determination inspired admiration throughout the army. Here was an emperor who insisted on sharing the hardships of his soldiers despite failing health. Caracalla respected that deeply. Perhaps more than anyone else. Geta also witnessed his father's endurance. But he saw something else. The emperor was dying. Whether anyone spoke the words aloud or not. Both brothers understood what that meant. Soon, the throne would belong to them. The shadow of succession. As Severus weakened, discussions about the future became unavoidable. Generals considered how authority would be transferred. Governors watched carefully for signs of instability. The Senate in Rome awaited news from Britain. The empire could not afford uncertainty. Officially, Septimius Severus made his wishes clear. Both sons would inherit together. Joint rule would preserve stability. The decision reflected both political calculation and paternal hope. He believed shared responsibility might prevent civil war. Yet even during the campaign, reports of arguments between the brothers continued. Minor disagreements became major confrontations. Officers noticed. Servants whispered. The emperor undoubtedly noticed as well. The final advice. In early AD 211, Septimius Severus knew his life was nearing its end. Confined largely to Eboracum, he summoned his sons. Ancient historian Cassius Dio preserves the essence of the advice traditionally attributed to the dying emperor. Live in harmony, enrich the soldiers, and disregard everyone else. Whether these were his exact words or a literary reconstruction, the message reflects the political realities of imperial Rome. Maintain unity. Keep the army loyal. Without those two pillars, no emperor could survive. It was wise advice. History remembers it because it was almost immediately ignored. Death at Eboracum. On February 4, AD 211, Septimius Severus died. He had ruled the Roman Empire for nearly 18 years. He left behind a stronger military. A more secure dynasty. An empire that had survived civil war and expanded its influence. His funeral honors reflected his achievements. Across the provinces, officials mourned the emperor. The legions grieved the commander who had shared their hardships. Julia Domna lost her husband. Caracalla and Geta lost their father. But Rome lost something even greater. The one man whose authority had been powerful enough to keep the brothers from destroying each other. Two emperors. Following Severus' death, Caracalla and Geta were recognized as joint emperors. For the first time in Roman history, the Severan dynasty rested entirely upon the shoulders of two young men who could scarcely endure each other's company. The journey back to Rome began. The imperial cortege carried the ashes of Septimius Severus toward the capital. Citizens lined the roads to honor the fallen emperor. Few suspected that they were also witnessing the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in Roman history. By the time the brothers returned to the Palatine Palace, their father would be gone. His advice would become little more than an echo. And the empire he had spent a lifetime building would soon be divided, not by foreign invaders, but by hatred within its own ruling family. The empire divided. Brothers of blood, the tragic fall of Caracalla and Geta. The funeral of Septimius Severus was magnificent. His ashes were carried with imperial honors. Senators dressed in white lined the streets. The Praetorian Guard marched in perfect formation. Veteran legionaries lowered their standards in respect for the emperor who had led them through nearly 2 decades of war. To the Roman people, everything appeared orderly. The empire had not fallen into civil war. The succession had gone exactly as planned. 2 young emperors now ruled together. The Severan dynasty had survived. Or so everyone believed. Behind the walls of the Palatine Palace, the empire was already beginning to tear itself apart. 2 thrones inside one palace. Caracalla and Geta inherited the Roman Empire together. On official documents, their names appeared side by side. Coins displayed both emperors. Public prayers were offered for both rulers. The Senate recognized both men as Augusti. Everything suggested equality. Reality was very different. Neither brother trusted the other. At first, they attempted to continue the appearance of cooperation. They attended ceremonies together. Received ambassadors. Signed official decrees. Presided over games. But every public appearance became a performance. Once the crowds disappeared, so did the illusion. A palace cut in half. Ancient historian Herodian describes an extraordinary situation developing inside the imperial palace. Rather than sharing their residence as co-emperors, the brothers effectively divided it into 2 separate territories. Each occupied different apartments. Different reception halls. Different entrances. Servants assigned to one side were generally not allowed to enter the other. Even seemingly ordinary matters became political. Separate kitchens prepared their meals. Separate dining rooms hosted their guests. Separate treasuries handled expenses. Separate secretaries drafted official correspondence. Doors connecting certain sections of the palace were reportedly sealed or heavily guarded to limit movement between the two households. It was no longer one imperial court. It was two rival governments operating under the same roof. No Roman emperor had ever ruled this way. The fear of poison. Trust had disappeared completely. According to ancient accounts, both emperors feared assassination. Meals became carefully supervised. Food tasters sampled dishes before either brother would eat. Wine was poured under close observation. Even gifts were viewed with suspicion. Imagine waking each morning convinced your own brother might try to kill you before sunset. Imagine wondering whether the servant bringing breakfast truly served you. Or someone else. Paranoia spread quickly. Every unexpected visitor raised questions. Every delay in a meeting inspired rumors. Every illness became the subject of whispered conspiracy theories. Fear became part of daily life. Rome begins to notice. Although the brothers tried to hide their hostility, Rome was too experienced to ignore the signs. Senators quickly realized that audiences with one emperor might anger the other. Governors delayed important decisions, uncertain whose approval truly mattered. Military commanders hesitated before sending reports. Which emperor should receive them first? Even the smallest administrative question risked becoming a political statement. Merchants complained that government business moved more slowly. Diplomats found themselves repeating the same discussions twice. Justice became inconsistent. The machinery of the empire had not stopped. But it was beginning to grind. Julia Domna between two sons. No one suffered more than Julia Domna. Her husband was gone. Now she found herself living inside a palace divided by hatred. Each morning she crossed invisible political borders simply to see her children. Ancient sources portray her as continuing to mediate between them. She organized meetings. Encouraged compromise. Reminded them of their father's final wishes. For brief moments, it seemed progress might be possible. Then another argument would begin. One brother accused the other of disrespect. The other answered with equal bitterness. The conversation collapsed. Julia was no longer merely the emperor's widow. She had become the last fragile bridge connecting two men who refused to meet halfway. The court chooses sides. Power attracts loyalty. It also attracts opportunists. As weeks passed, members of the imperial administration quietly aligned themselves with one emperor or the other. Some believed Caracalla possessed the stronger relationship with the army. Others thought Geta would prove the more stable ruler. Few openly declared their preferences. Doing so could prove fatal if the balance of power changed. Conversations became cautious. Letters were written more carefully. Trusted friends suddenly seemed less trustworthy. One careless remark might be repeated in the wrong ears. The palace no longer felt like the center of an empire. It felt like the calm before a civil war. The proposal that could have changed history. Eventually, the conflict reached an astonishing point. According to Herodian, one solution was seriously discussed. If the brothers could not rule together, perhaps they should divide the empire itself. Caracalla would govern the western provinces. Italy, Gaul, Spain, Britain, the Rhine frontier. Geta would rule the east. Greece, Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, the wealthy eastern cities. Each would possess his own administration, armies, and capital. At first glance, the proposal seemed practical. Rome had become enormous. The empire stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to Mesopotamia. Surely two emperors governing separate regions could preserve peace. But there was one person who refused to accept the idea. Julia Domna. A mother's refusal. Ancient accounts describe Julia reacting with profound emotion when the possibility of dividing the empire, and therefore dividing the family forever, was raised. She reportedly asked her sons a devastating question. If you divide the empire, who will divide your mother? Her words struck at the heart of the matter. Political maps could be redrawn. Borders could shift. Armies could relocate. But a mother could not belong to two separate courts at once. She refused to choose between her sons. For a moment, silence filled the room. But emotion alone could no longer overcome years of resentment. The proposal gradually faded. Not because the brothers had reconciled. Because neither trusted the other enough to make division work. Each suspected the other would use the opportunity to prepare for war. Caracalla's decision. By late AD 211, Caracalla appears to have reached a conclusion. As long as Geta lived, his own position would never be secure. Every senator dissatisfied with imperial policy might support the younger brother. Every ambitious general could rally behind an alternative emperor. Every political disagreement risked becoming a constitutional crisis. In Caracalla's mind, the problem was no longer personal. It had become existential. He convinced himself that Rome could have only one ruler. Only one commander. Only one Augustus. And if that were true, only one brother could survive. The first secret plans. Ancient historians differ on the precise sequence of events, but they agree that plots began to emerge. Some accounts suggest Caracalla first considered arranging an assassination during a public ceremony. Others describe plans involving soldiers loyal to him inside the palace. Whatever the exact details, the idea of murder had entered the emperor's mind. Once such thoughts appear, they rarely disappear. Meanwhile, Geta also increased his personal security. He surrounded himself with trusted guards. Limited access to his private chambers. Avoided unnecessary meetings with his brother. Whether he suspected a specific plot or simply recognized the danger, he clearly understood that the situation had become critical. The palace had become a fortress divided against itself. The invitation. Then, unexpectedly, hope appeared. Julia Domna proposed one more attempt at reconciliation. No guards. No senators. No advisors. Only a mother. And her two sons. If they could speak honestly, perhaps years of bitterness might finally end. The brothers agreed. The meeting would take place in Julia's private apartments. Neutral ground. A place where no weapons should have been drawn. Where a mother hoped to save her family. Caracalla accepted the invitation. Geta accepted the invitation. Only one of them intended to leave alive. The next meeting between the brothers would last only a few moments. It would become one of the most infamous murders in the entire history of the Roman Empire. The murder of Geta. Brothers of blood, the tragic fall of Caracalla and Geta. Rome, December AD 211. Winter had settled over the eternal city. Cold air drifted through the streets before sunrise as merchants opened their stalls and priests prepared the morning sacrifices. To the people of Rome, it seemed like any other day. The Senate expected another routine session. Citizens hurried through the forum. Children played beneath monuments celebrating emperors long dead. No one outside the Palatine Hill knew that before the day was over, one of Rome's emperors would be dead. Not on a battlefield. Not in a conspiracy led by ambitious generals. Not at the hands of foreign enemies. But murdered by his own brother. The final attempt at peace. For weeks, Julia Domna had watched the situation deteriorate. Every effort to reconcile her sons had failed. The palace had become two hostile camps. The empire itself seemed frozen by uncertainty. According to the ancient historian Herodian, Julia believed there was only one hope left. A private meeting. No senators. No praetorian officers. No court officials. Only a mother and her 2 sons. She sent messages to both emperors. Come unarmed. Leave your guards outside. Speak openly. Remember your father. Remember your family. Remember Rome. Caracalla accepted. So did Geta. To Julia, it seemed that perhaps, finally, they were willing to listen. She had no way of knowing that one of her sons had already made his decision. A carefully prepared trap. Caracalla had no intention of reconciling. Ancient sources differ on exactly how the plot was organized, but they agree on its essential outline. A group of trusted centurions had been secretly instructed to remain nearby. They would wait for a signal. Then enter the room. Quickly. Decisively. No hesitation. The location itself worked in Caracalla's favor. Julia's private apartments were considered safe. Geta would arrive expecting conversation. Not violence. The greatest advantage any assassin can possess is surprise. Geta arrives. Geta entered his mother's chambers without armor. Without an escort at his side. He had obeyed the conditions of the meeting. Perhaps he still believed that blood ties mattered. Perhaps he trusted his mother's presence. Or perhaps he simply hoped the nightmare could finally end. For nearly a year, every day had been consumed by fear, arguments, suspicion, and political paralysis. Surely no one would commit murder in front of their own mother. If that thought crossed his mind, it would prove fatally wrong. The last conversation. No ancient historian records every word spoken inside the room. What survives comes only in fragments. One can imagine the silence. Julia standing between her sons. Caracalla watching Geta carefully. Geta searching his brother's face for some sign of sincerity. Perhaps Julia reminded them of their childhood. Perhaps she repeated their father's final advice. Perhaps she pleaded with them to think of Rome before themselves. For a brief moment, everything depended upon words. Then, words became meaningless. The signal. Without warning, armed men burst into the room. The doors flew open. The sound of iron against marble shattered the silence. Centurions rushed forward with drawn swords. Geta froze. This was no misunderstanding. No heated argument. No accidental confrontation. This was an execution. Realization came instantly. His own brother had planned everything. A son runs to his mother. Ancient writers describe what happened next with striking consistency. Geta did not attack. He did not attempt to fight trained soldiers. Instead, he ran toward Julia Domna, throwing himself into her embrace, clinging to his mother as though she could still protect him. He cried out for help. Some ancient accounts preserve his desperate appeal. "Mother! Help me! They are killing me!" Julia wrapped her arms around her younger son. She screamed. She begged the soldiers to stop. For one impossible moment, the fate of an empire seemed suspended. Then the centurions obeyed the only command that mattered. The emperor's. Murder before the eyes of Rome's mother. Steel flashed. The first blow struck. Then another. Then another. The attack lasted only seconds. Geta collapsed against Julia. Blood spread across her robes. Across the marble floor. Across the chamber where she had hoped to restore peace. The younger emperor died in his mother's arms. He was only 22 years old. There would be no trial. No Senate decree. No formal accusation. Only silence. The silence that follows irreversible violence. Caracalla watches. Caracalla remained alive. Uninjured. The only emperor left standing. Ancient historians differ in their descriptions of his demeanor. Some portray him as cold and calculating. Others suggest he immediately justified his actions by claiming he had acted in self-defense against an alleged conspiracy. Whatever his emotional state, one fact remained undeniable. The murder had achieved exactly what he wanted. There was no longer any rival claimant inside the palace. No second Augustus. No equal. Rome had one emperor. Julia Domna's nightmare. Imagine that moment. One son dead. The other responsible. The empire waiting outside. Julia Domna had spent decades helping build the Severan dynasty. Now she knelt beside the body of her murdered child. Ancient accounts describe her remaining astonishingly composed despite overwhelming grief. She had little choice. The government still existed. The palace still functioned. The empire still required leadership. Personal sorrow became a private burden. Public duty remained. Few figures in Roman history endured such a cruel intersection of family tragedy and political necessity. The palace falls silent. News spread quickly. Servants whispered. Guards exchanged frightened glances. Officials hurried through corridors seeking reliable information. What had happened? Who was alive? Who controlled the palace? Within hours, everyone knew. Geta was dead. Caracalla had survived. And survival determined legitimacy. The Praetorian Guard secured key entrances. Messengers rode toward important military commanders. The Senate was informed. The imperial administration prepared to recognize the new reality. Resistance seemed impossible. Justifying the unthinkable. Caracalla understood that murdering a fellow emperor, even a brother, required explanation. He appeared before the Praetorian Guard and claimed that Geta had plotted against his life. According to Cassius Dio and Herodian, he argued that he had merely struck first to preserve himself and the stability of the empire. Whether anyone truly believed him remains uncertain. Many soldiers probably cared less about family loyalty than about political stability and continued imperial generosity. Others may have privately doubted his account. Open disagreement, however, could now become a death sentence. One brother left. As evening fell over Rome, the imperial palace seemed unchanged from the outside. Its walls still overlooked the Forum. Its guards still stood watch. Its banners still flew above the rooftops. Yet inside, everything had changed. One brother lay dead. The other held absolute power. But Caracalla's victory carried an unexpected consequence. Killing Geta removed the rival. It did not remove everyone who had loved him. Friends. Officials. Servants. Soldiers. Senators. Thousands of people had known the younger emperor. Many had supported him. Many had served him faithfully. Caracalla now faced a terrifying question. How could he ensure that no one would ever avenge Geta? His answer would plunge Rome into one of the darkest periods of political repression in imperial history. The murder was over. The terror was only beginning. Erasing a brother from history. Brothers of blood, the tragic fall of Caracalla and Geta. The murder of Geta lasted only a few moments. The consequences lasted for years. Inside the palace, servants quietly scrubbed blood from the marble floors. Broken furniture was removed. The chamber where an emperor had died was restored as though nothing had happened. But there was one stain that could not be washed away. The Roman Empire had witnessed many assassinations. Generals had overthrown emperors. Praetorian guards had murdered rulers. Usurpers had seized the throne. Yet this was different. An emperor had murdered his own brother. And everyone in Rome knew it. Caracalla understood something immediately. Killing Geta was only the first step. Now he had to erase him. Winning the army. Before addressing the Senate. Before speaking to the Roman people. Caracalla went where real power lay. The Praetorian Guard. Standing before the soldiers, he presented himself not as a murderer, but as a survivor. According to Cassius Dio, Caracalla claimed that Geta had secretly planned to assassinate him and that he had acted only to save his own life. Whether this was true remains highly doubtful. No convincing contemporary evidence supports the existence of such a plot. Nevertheless, in Roman politics, perception often mattered more than proof. The soldiers listened. Some may have believed him. Others almost certainly did not. But Caracalla understood the military better than anyone. He knew loyalty could be reinforced through generosity. He announced substantial financial rewards for the troops. The emperor who enriched the army usually kept the army. It was a lesson his father had taught him well. The Senate's silence. The Senate assembled under extraordinary circumstances. Many senators had known Geta personally. Some had served under him. Others had quietly preferred him over his older brother. Now they entered the Curia uncertain whether they themselves might become suspects. Caracalla appeared before them heavily guarded. He repeated the same story. Geta had betrayed him. The empire had been saved. The assassination had been an act of self-defense. No senator openly challenged the emperor. Not because they were convinced. Because they understood the danger. Cassius Dio, himself a senator, later wrote that fear dominated the chamber. The emperor's soldiers were nearby. One accusation of disloyalty could end a career. Or a life. The Senate formally accepted Caracalla's version of events. Whether anyone truly believed it is another question entirely. Damnatio memoriae. Rome possessed a punishment unlike almost any other civilization. It was called damnatio memoriae. Literally. The condemnation of memory. The goal was extraordinary. Not simply to execute an enemy. But to erase that person from history itself. Caracalla ordered Geta subjected to this punishment. Imperial portraits were removed. Statues were smashed or recarved. Official inscriptions bearing Geta's name were chiseled away. His face disappeared from reliefs. His image vanished from public buildings. Across the empire, local officials received instructions to eliminate visible reminders of the murdered emperor. Imagine waking one morning to discover that your brother's existence had become illegal. That was precisely what Caracalla intended. Destroying an emperor's face. Stonecutters throughout the empire suddenly found themselves performing unusual work. Instead of creating monuments, they destroyed them. On countless inscriptions, Geta's name was carefully carved out, leaving visible scars in the stone. Some statues were shattered completely. Others proved too valuable to discard. Artists simply reshaped the faces. One emperor became another. Archaeologists still find these alterations today. Look closely at certain Severan monuments, and the empty spaces tell their own story. Where one brother once stood, there is only absence. Ironically, these damaged monuments became some of the strongest evidence that Geta had once existed. Attempts to erase history often preserve it in unexpected ways. Coins without a brother. Roman coins traveled farther than almost anything else produced by the empire. Merchants carried them from Britain to Egypt. Soldiers received them as pay. Tax collectors accepted them across thousands of towns and villages. Many coins featured both imperial brothers. Now they became a problem. Some were withdrawn. Others were melted down. New issues displayed only Caracalla. Every transaction became another reminder that Rome now recognized a single ruler. Money itself became propaganda. Every coin passing from hand to hand repeated the same message. There had never been two emperors. Only one. Hunting Geta's supporters. Erasing monuments proved relatively simple. Erasing loyalty proved impossible. Caracalla believed many officials remained devoted to his dead brother. Whether this fear reflected genuine conspiracies or growing paranoia remains debated. Either way, the emperor responded with ruthless determination. Ancient sources report widespread investigations. Friends of Geta disappeared. Members of his household were arrested. Officials suspected of sympathy faced interrogation. Some were executed. Others lost property. Some simply vanished from the historical record. Cassius Dio claims the number of victims reached into the thousands, although modern historians caution that ancient figures may be exaggerated. Even if the exact number is uncertain, there is little doubt that the purge was extensive. Rome had entered an age of fear. A city learns to whisper. Citizens quickly adapted. Public conversation changed almost overnight. No one spoke Geta's name openly. Servants became careful about what they repeated. Families avoided political discussions even inside their own homes. Senators praised Caracalla enthusiastically in public. Privately, many remained silent. Silence had become the safest opinion. Imagine living in a city where remembering the wrong person could end your life. Where even grief became dangerous. That was Rome after December AD 211. Julia Domna's impossible existence. No punishment could erase Julia Domna's memories. She had held Geta as an infant. Watched him learn to walk. Educated him. Comforted him. And finally, held him as he died. Now she was expected to continue serving the son responsible for his death. Ancient writers suggest that Julia withdrew emotionally while remaining active in government. She attended official functions. Reviewed correspondence. Helped administer the empire. Duty left little room for mourning. Every public appearance demanded composure. Every ceremony required dignity. Behind the imperial purple stood a mother carrying grief few people could imagine. Absolute power at last. For Caracalla, the purge achieved its immediate objective. There was no rival emperor. No competing court. No divided administration. Orders moved more quickly. Officials no longer wondered whose approval mattered. The empire once again had one unquestioned ruler. Yet something fundamental had changed. Septimius Severus had ruled through military strength combined with political calculation. Caracalla increasingly ruled through fear. Obedience replaced trust. Suspicion replaced cooperation. Even loyal officials wondered. If he could kill his own brother, what might he do to us? Fear can maintain power. But fear rarely creates loyalty. The cost of victory. Caracalla had won. He possessed everything he believed he wanted. The imperial throne. The army. The treasury. The title of Augustus. Absolute authority. Yet victory brought no peace. Instead, the emperor seemed increasingly isolated. He trusted fewer people. Relied more heavily on soldiers. Spent less time with senators. The man who had eliminated every rival now began seeing potential enemies everywhere. Perhaps he believed that what he had done to Geta, someone else might one day do to him. History often shows that violence changes not only its victims. It changes those who wield it. A new emperor emerges. Over the following months, Caracalla transformed the image of the Roman emperor. He embraced military life more openly than ever before. He dressed like the soldiers. Marched beside them. Shared their hardships. Rewarded their loyalty generously. At the same time, he became increasingly distant from the traditional Roman aristocracy. The balance of imperial power was shifting. The Senate mattered less. The army mattered more. It was a transformation that would shape not only Caracalla's reign, but much of the 3rd century that followed. Yet even absolute power could not silence one question. Had murdering Geta truly made Caracalla stronger? Or had it merely begun a chain of events that would eventually destroy him as well? The answer awaited in the eastern provinces of the empire, where ambition, war, and destiny were already moving toward their final confrontation. The Emperor of Fear. Brothers of Blood, the tragic fall of Caracalla and Geta. The marble statues were gone. Geta's name had vanished from inscriptions. His portraits had been shattered. His supporters were dead, imprisoned, or living in silence. Caracalla had achieved what no Roman emperor before him had attempted on such a scale. He had erased his own brother from public memory. But there was one place where Geta still existed. Inside Caracalla's mind. Ancient writers often portray the emperor after AD 211 as increasingly suspicious and isolated. While their accounts are shaped by hindsight and political bias, they consistently describe a ruler who trusted few people and relied ever more heavily on the army. The man who had feared one rival now seemed to fear everyone. The soldier emperor. Unlike many rulers before him, Caracalla rarely tried to present himself as a philosopher or a statesman. He wanted to be seen as a soldier. He shortened the distance between himself and the legions. He ate with them, marched beside them, shared their tents during campaigns, wore practical military clothing instead of elaborate ceremonial robes whenever possible. To ordinary legionaries, this mattered. Many had served under Septimius Severus. Now they saw his eldest son continuing the same military traditions. Some even admired him deeply. Caracalla understood a simple truth. An emperor protected by the love of soldiers was difficult to overthrow. Buying loyalty. Military loyalty, however, came at a price. Soon after becoming sole ruler, Caracalla significantly increased the annual pay of Roman legionaries. The decision delighted the army. For many soldiers, it confirmed that the new emperor valued their service above all else. But nothing in government is free. Higher military salaries demanded greater revenue. Taxes increased. Financial pressure spread across the empire. Provincial administrators searched for new income. Merchants complained. Landowners grumbled. The army celebrated. The treasury groaned. Caracalla had strengthened the foundation of his power, while quietly weakening the empire's finances. The edict that changed Rome forever. In AD 212, Caracalla issued one of the most important legal reforms in Roman history. It became known as the Constitutio Antoniniana. The decree granted Roman citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire. For centuries, citizenship had been a privilege. It brought legal protections, political status, tax implications, prestige. Now millions of people, from Britain to Egypt, became Roman citizens. Historians still debate Caracalla's motives. Some believe he genuinely wished to unify the empire under a common legal identity. Others argue that expanding citizenship also expanded the number of people liable for certain taxes, increasing imperial revenue. The truth may include elements of both. Regardless of motive, the decision permanently changed what it meant to be Roman. For the first time, the empire became less a collection of conquered peoples, and more a shared political community. It remains one of Caracalla's most enduring legacies. The Baths of Caracalla. Despite his military reputation, Caracalla also left behind one of the greatest architectural achievements of the ancient world. Construction began on enormous public baths in Rome. They would eventually cover more than 25 hectares. Their scale astonished contemporaries. The complex included vast bathing halls, heated rooms, cold pools, gardens, libraries, exercise courts, fountains, and richly decorated interiors lined with marble from across the empire. Thousands of Romans could visit every day. The baths represented more than luxury. They demonstrated imperial generosity. A reminder that even an emperor feared by many still sought public admiration. Today, the ruins of the baths of Caracalla remain among the most impressive monuments surviving from ancient Rome. Ironically, a ruler remembered for violence also built one of its greatest public spaces. Chasing Alexander the Great. As Caracalla's reign progressed, another obsession became increasingly obvious. Alexander the Great. The Macedonian conqueror had died nearly 5 centuries earlier. Yet his legend continued to inspire rulers across the ancient world. Caracalla admired him intensely. Perhaps excessively. Ancient authors claim he dressed in styles associated with Alexander. Visited places connected to his campaigns. Studied his victories. Surrounded himself with imagery celebrating the Macedonian king. Some reports even describe military units reorganized to imitate the famous Macedonian phalanx, though the practical significance of these efforts remains uncertain. Whether admiration became obsession is difficult to judge. Ancient historians, many hostile toward Caracalla, may have exaggerated his behavior. Still, his fascination with Alexander appears genuine. He no longer wished merely to rule Rome. He wanted to rival history's greatest conqueror. Alexandria. In AD 215, Caracalla traveled to Alexandria in Egypt. The city was unlike any other in the empire. Founded by Alexander himself, Alexandria remained one of the world's greatest centers of learning. Its scholars, philosophers, and intellectuals possessed a reputation for wit and satire. According to ancient sources, the citizens mocked Caracalla, comparing him unfavorably with Alexander and ridiculing the murder of Geta. Whether the insults were widespread or limited to certain groups remains impossible to know. Caracalla's response became infamous. After initially appearing friendly, he ordered soldiers to attack large numbers of the city's inhabitants. Ancient writers describe widespread killing and looting. The exact scale remains debated, but there is broad agreement that severe violence occurred. Alexandria learned a brutal lesson. Mocking an emperor could carry catastrophic consequences. An emperor without trust. Years had passed since Geta's death. Yet Caracalla still struggled to trust those around him. Court life became increasingly militarized. Soldiers occupied prominent positions. Civilian advisors lost influence. The emperor spent more time traveling with the army than governing from Rome. This strengthened his relationship with the legions. It weakened his relationship with the Senate. Many aristocrats viewed him with growing unease. Many soldiers viewed him with growing admiration. The empire itself reflected this divide. Eastward once again. By AD 216, Caracalla had fixed his attention on Rome's greatest eastern rival. The Parthian Empire. For generations, Rome and Parthia had competed for influence across Mesopotamia and Armenia. Victories against Parthia brought prestige. Defeats brought humiliation. Caracalla believed a successful eastern campaign could elevate his reputation to the level of Alexander the Great. Preparations began. Legions assembled. Supplies moved east. The emperor personally accompanied the army. Once again, he seemed happiest among soldiers rather than politicians. He believed another great victory awaited him. Instead, someone much closer posed the greatest danger. A trusted official. Among the emperor's senior officials stood Marcus Opellius Macrinus. An experienced administrator of equestrian rank, Macrinus served as praetorian prefect, one of the most powerful offices in the empire. He supervised the Praetorian Guard. Managed sensitive intelligence. Handled matters requiring complete imperial confidence. Caracalla trusted him. Or at least, trusted him more than most. Macrinus had every reason to appear loyal. Successful. Respected. Close to the emperor. Yet beneath the surface, events were unfolding that neither man fully controlled. Rumors. Prophecies. Fear. Political survival. The same forces that had once driven Caracalla to murder his brother were beginning to gather around him. History was preparing to repeat one of its oldest lessons. Those who rule through fear often discover that fear eventually turns against them. The wheel turns. Caracalla had survived every challenge. He had inherited the empire, destroyed his rival, silenced opposition, expanded citizenship, built magnificent monuments, won the devotion of much of the army. Yet absolute power has an unavoidable consequence. Every ambitious man begins asking the same question. What happens after him? Somewhere within the imperial administration, that question was already being whispered. The emperor could not hear it. But destiny was already walking toward him. The road that began with the murder of Geta was about to end in the dust of Mesopotamia, where another emperor would discover that no amount of soldiers, wealth, or fear could protect a man forever. The assassination. Brothers of blood, the tragic fall of Caracalla and Geta. For nearly 6 years, Caracalla had ruled the Roman Empire alone. No brother challenged him. No senator dared oppose him openly. The army remained loyal. His enemies were either dead or too frightened to act. From the outside, he appeared untouchable. Yet history has repeatedly shown that the most dangerous threats to an emperor rarely come from across the frontier. They come from the men standing closest to him. And in the spring of AD 217, somewhere on the long roads of Mesopotamia, fate finally caught up with the emperor who had believed himself invincible. Marching toward glory, Caracalla had committed himself to a new eastern campaign. Officially, Rome sought to weaken the Parthian Empire. Unofficially, the emperor dreamed of something much greater. He wanted to be remembered alongside Alexander the Great. Everywhere he traveled, reminders of Alexander surrounded him. He visited cities founded by the Macedonian conqueror. He honored places connected with his campaigns. He admired the image of a young ruler who had conquered half the known world before dying at only 32 years of age. Caracalla wanted history to speak of him in the same breath. The irony was almost impossible to ignore. Alexander died unexpectedly during a campaign in the east. Caracalla was unknowingly walking toward a remarkably similar fate. A growing sense of unease. The imperial court had become increasingly tense. Caracalla trusted very few people. Even those closest to him understood that imperial favor could disappear overnight. A careless remark, a rumor, a misunderstood order. Any of these might be interpreted as betrayal. Among the emperor's closest officials stood Marcus Opellius Macrinus, the Praetorian prefect. He managed the emperor's personal security, oversaw intelligence, controlled many of the guards surrounding the imperial household. In theory, few men were more loyal. In reality, few men possessed greater opportunity. A prophecy. Ancient historians preserve a fascinating story. According to Cassius Dio and Herodian, a prophecy or oracle reached Caracalla suggesting that Macrinus might one day become emperor. Whether the prophecy truly existed is impossible to prove. Ancient writers often included omens to explain dramatic historical events. Even so, rumors mattered, especially in imperial politics. If Caracalla believed such a prediction, Macrinus' life would immediately be in danger. The Praetorian prefect understood this. Whether the emperor had already decided to remove him or merely suspected him remains uncertain. But Macrinus reached a terrifying conclusion. If he waited, he might die. If he acted first, he might live. It was precisely the same logic Caracalla had once used against Geta. Conspiracy. Macrinus did not command an army of rebels. He did not proclaim himself emperor. He did not march openly against Rome. Instead, he chose the oldest method of changing power in the Roman Empire: assassination. A small group of trusted men became involved. Among them was a soldier named Julius Martialis. Ancient accounts suggest Martialis held a personal grievance against the emperor, possibly connected to the execution of his brother or another close relative. Whether personal revenge, political ambition, or both motivated him, he became the instrument of history. The road to Carrhae. In early April AD 217, Caracalla traveled through northern Mesopotamia. The emperor intended to visit a temple dedicated to the moon god near Carrhae, a city already famous in Roman history as the place where Crassus had suffered catastrophic defeat against the Parthians in 53 BC. The journey appeared routine. Guards surrounded the imperial party. Officers rode nearby. Nothing suggested imminent danger. Caracalla felt secure. Perhaps too secure. A brief stop. On April 8, AD 217, the imperial procession halted along the road. Ancient historians record a surprisingly ordinary reason. The emperor wished to relieve himself. Caracalla dismounted. He walked away from the main group with only limited protection. For perhaps the first time in years, the ruler of the Roman world stood almost alone. It was the opportunity the conspirators had been waiting for. The emperor falls. Julius Martialis approached. Nothing seemed unusual. He was one of the emperor's own soldiers. Trusted. Familiar. Close enough to avoid suspicion. Then, without warning, he drew a dagger. The blade struck Caracalla. The emperor collapsed. Some guards reacted instantly. Martialis attempted to flee. He was quickly killed by mounted troops before he could escape. The assassin died only moments after completing his mission. But it no longer mattered. The Roman emperor lay dead beside a dusty road far from Rome. He was 29 years old. Silence across the camp. For several moments, confusion reigned. Had the emperor truly been killed? Was he merely wounded? Who commanded the army now? Officers rushed toward the scene. Messengers galloped through the camp. Soldiers gathered in stunned disbelief. Many had genuinely admired Caracalla. He had marched beside them, shared their hardships, increased their pay. Unlike some emperors, he rarely hid behind palace walls. Now he was gone. Not in glorious battle. Not facing Rome's enemies. But murdered by one of his own men. Macrinus becomes emperor. Only a few days later, the army proclaimed Macrinus emperor. It was one of the most remarkable successions in Roman history. Macrinus had not belonged to the senatorial aristocracy. He became the first Roman emperor drawn from the equestrian order rather than the Senate. Officially, he denied involvement in Caracalla's death. Ancient historians, however, overwhelmingly believed that he had organized the conspiracy. Modern historians generally consider his involvement highly probable, although absolute proof is impossible. Regardless of the exact details, the result was undeniable. The man responsible for protecting the emperor now occupied the throne himself. The end of a dynasty's dream. When Septimius Severus died in Britain 6 years earlier, he believed he had secured the future. 2 sons. A powerful army. A stable dynasty. Instead, one son murdered the other. The surviving son was assassinated. The carefully built future of the Severan family collapsed with astonishing speed. Yet history was not finished with the dynasty. Members of the Severan family still lived. And within a single year, another dramatic struggle for power would begin. But Caracalla would never see it. Was it justice? For centuries, historians have debated Caracalla's legacy. Was he simply a brutal tyrant? A capable military ruler shaped by extraordinary circumstances? A reformer remembered only for his crimes? Or a deeply damaged man whose greatest enemy was ultimately his own fear? The answer is probably more complex than any single label. He expanded Roman citizenship. He strengthened the army. He commissioned magnificent public works. He also murdered his brother. Ordered political purges. Oversaw severe violence against civilians. His reign remains one of the most contradictory in Roman history. The circle closes. There is a haunting symmetry to Caracalla's life. He believed only one brother could survive. He was right. But he also believed eliminating Geta would guarantee his own safety. He was wrong. The violence he unleashed became part of the political culture surrounding him. The fear he inspired spread beyond his enemies. Eventually, it reached his closest advisors. Just as he had once feared Geta, Macrinus came to fear him. And fear, once released, rarely chooses only one victim. The emperor who seized absolute power through murder lost it in exactly the same way. Only one chapter remained. Not the story of how two brothers died, but how history remembered them. How archaeologists rediscovered the truth hidden beneath broken statues and erased inscriptions. And why, nearly 18 centuries later, the tragedy of Caracalla and Geta continues to fascinate the world. The legacy of two brothers. Brothers of blood, the tragic fall of Caracalla and Geta. Rome never forgot. Caracalla had believed he could erase his brother forever. He ordered statues destroyed. Names chiseled from stone. Portraits shattered. Coins melted down. Witnesses silenced. For a time, it seemed he had succeeded. Walk through Rome in AD 212, and you would struggle to find any official reminder that Emperor Geta had ever existed. It was as though one of the rulers of the greatest empire in history had simply vanished. But history is stubborn. Stone remembers. And so do people. The failure of Damnatio Memoriae. The Romans understood that memory was power. That was why Damnatio Memoriae existed. If future generations never saw your face, never read your name, never heard your story, it would be as if you had never lived at all. Yet the punishment contained an unavoidable contradiction. Destroying a monument often left obvious evidence that something had been destroyed. Modern archaeologists regularly discover inscriptions where a single name has been carefully carved away. Everything else remains perfectly preserved. Only one section is missing. Only one face disappears from family reliefs. Only one emperor vanishes from official portraits. Ironically, those empty spaces became some of the strongest evidence that Geta had once stood there. The attempt to erase him became impossible to hide. The family portrait. One of the most striking surviving objects from the Severan dynasty is a painted family portrait, now badly damaged. It once showed four people: Septimius Severus, Julia Domna, Caracalla, and Geta. At some point after the murder, someone deliberately scraped away Geta's face. The place where the younger brother once looked toward the viewer became an empty scar. Nothing illustrates the brutality of Damnatio Memoriae more clearly. A family portrait. Destroyed by one member of the family itself. Even after nearly 18 centuries. The absence is more powerful than any surviving image. The historians. Much of what we know about these events comes from three principal ancient writers. Cassius Dio, a Roman senator who lived during the Severan period, provides one of the most valuable accounts. Because he witnessed many events firsthand or lived close to them in time, his history remains indispensable, though his aristocratic perspective often makes him highly critical of Caracalla. Herodian, writing somewhat later, focused on the dramatic and political dimensions of the age. His narrative is vivid and accessible, though historians sometimes debate its precision. The Historia Augusta, compiled much later, preserves additional stories, but modern scholars treat it with great caution because it mixes genuine information with anecdotes that are difficult or impossible to verify. By comparing these sources with inscriptions, coins, papyri, and archaeological discoveries, historians continue refining our understanding of the Severan dynasty. History is rarely a single voice. It is a conversation across centuries. Was Caracalla always destined for violence? This question has fascinated historians for generations. Was Caracalla born cruel? Or did power transform him? No source allows us to answer with certainty. He grew up inside an imperial palace where trust was rare. He watched his father win the throne through civil war. He learned that armies decided politics. He spent much of his youth among soldiers. He inherited an empire alongside a brother he neither trusted nor understood. None of these circumstances excuse murder. But they help explain the world that shaped him. The Roman Empire rewarded strength. It often confused fear with authority. In such a system, mercy could appear dangerous. And what about Geta? Geta's reputation presents the opposite problem. Because he died young, he never ruled alone. Many ancient writers portrayed him sympathetically after his murder. Some may have idealized him precisely because he became the victim. Would he have proved a wiser emperor? A more peaceful ruler? A better administrator? We simply do not know. History rarely reveals the lives people never had the chance to live. Geta remains one of Rome's greatest historical what-ifs. Julia Domna. Perhaps no survivor paid a higher personal price than Julia Domna. She lost her husband. She lost one son to murder. She continued serving the son responsible for that murder. After Caracalla's assassination in AD 217, her political influence rapidly declined. According to the ancient sources, she later died in Antioch, possibly after refusing food while suffering from illness and grief, though the exact circumstances remain uncertain. She had once stood at the center of the most powerful family on earth. Within a few years, nearly everything she had helped build had disappeared. The Severan legacy. Despite the violence surrounding its later years, the Severan dynasty profoundly shaped the Roman Empire. Septimius Severus strengthened the military and expanded imperial authority. Caracalla's Constitutio Antoniniana transformed Roman citizenship forever. The baths of Caracalla remain among the greatest engineering achievements of antiquity. The dynasty also revealed the dangers of concentrating enormous power within a single family. Rome had hoped that blood would guarantee stability. Instead, blood became the dynasty's downfall. Lessons from two brothers. The story of Caracalla and Geta is often described as a political tragedy. But at its heart, it is deeply human. Two brothers, raised together, educated by the finest teachers, given wealth beyond imagination, entrusted with the greatest empire in the ancient world. And yet, neither could overcome resentment. Neither could truly trust the other. Their conflict reminds us that political systems are ultimately shaped by people, their ambitions, fears, and choices. Empires may possess magnificent armies, towering monuments, sophisticated laws, but they remain vulnerable to the emotions of those who rule them. Sometimes, history changes not because of invading armies, but because two brothers cannot forgive each other. Epilogue. On the Palatine Hill today, visitors walk among the ruins of the imperial palaces. The marble floors are broken. The roofs are gone. Grass grows where emperors once held court. Tourists pass through rooms that once echoed with the footsteps of soldiers and senators. Somewhere within those ruins, a mother once held her dying son. Somewhere nearby, another son believed he had secured his future through murder. Neither victory nor hatred survived. Time claimed them both. The empire they ruled eventually faded. Their palaces crumbled. Their armies disappeared. But their story endured. Not because they conquered the world. Not because they built monuments. But because they revealed something timeless about power, and about the human heart. In the end, Caracalla succeeded in becoming the sole ruler of Rome. Yet history remembers him not as the emperor who ruled alone, but as the brother who killed his brother. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. The memory he tried so desperately to erase became forever tied to his own. The end. The Roman Empire was not brought to greatness by stone alone, nor was it weakened only by foreign enemies. Sometimes, the fate of millions turned on the choices made within a single family. The tragedy of Caracalla and Geta reminds us that the greatest battles in history are often fought not across borders, but across a dinner table, between brothers.